At 11:45 on a Tuesday morning, the president of my homeowner association was stuck on all fours on my side walkway, her hands and bare feet glued to the concrete like a fly on tape. My buddy Derek and I stood on the porch with cold beers, calmly taking a high-definition photograph of her absolute defeat while her clipboard lay in the damp grass. Within 10 minutes, police sirens were echoing down the street, and half the neighborhood had gathered at the fence with their phones out, laughing at the woman who had spent years terrorizing them. My name is Kyle. I am a 32-year-old software engineer, and all I wanted in Whispering Pines was a quiet place to work and eat pizza. Before I tell you how a mad scientist chemistry experiment turned this suburban dictator into a local laughingstock, we have to go back to my very first night. Because when you look out your window in the dark and see a face with a visor taking notes on your living room, you realize the quiet life is officially over. I always thought moving to the suburbs was supposed to be the start of the quiet life. You know the dream. A little patch of grass, a mailbox that actually stands up straight, and neighbors who mind their own business. I bought a place in a subdivision called Whispering Pines, which should have been my first warning sign. Any development named after what it cleared away to build the houses is always hiding something. In my case, it was hiding a community warden with a bad haircut and an unhealthy obsession with other people's property. It started on my very first night. I had spent 12 hours carrying heavy cardboard boxes up a flight of stairs, and my back was screaming at me. The house was a disaster zone of packing tape and bubble wrap. The air smelled like fresh paint and cheap, greasy cheese from the cardboard box pizza I had ordered. I was sitting on the living room floor, leaning against the sofa, watching a movie on a television that was still sitting on a plastic crate. It was about 11 at night, and the street outside was completely dark. I was halfway through my third slice of pepperoni when I felt that prickly sensation on the back of my neck. You know that feeling, right? Like someone is standing right behind you, staring. I ignored it at first. I figured I was just exhausted. But then I looked toward the side window. There was a face pressed against the glass. I did not just flinch. I let out a noise that I am not proud of. A high-pitched squeak that sent my pizza slice sliding crust down onto my brand-new rug. I scrambled backward, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The figure outside did not even blink. It was a woman, illuminated only by the faint glow of my television screen. She had a visor pulled low over her forehead and a wooden clipboard clutched to her chest. She stared at me for 3 long seconds, completely unfazed by my terror. Then she looked down, scribbled something on her paper with a heavy, deliberate stroke, turned around, and walked into the dark. I sat there on the floor, staring at the empty window, wondering if the mushrooms on my pizza had been past their expiration date. I finally got the courage to go outside. The night air was cool, smelling of damp earth and cut grass. The street was empty. The only sound was the distant hum of the highway and the crunch of my own shoes on the gravel. I could see a shadow walking quickly under a street lamp about 3 houses down. But by the time I reached the edge of my driveway, they were gone. I went back inside, locked every lock on the front door, and barely slept a wink. The next morning, the sun was shining, and the whole thing felt like a bad dream. I was standing in my kitchen, waiting for the coffee maker to finish its slow, sputtering song. The smell of dark roast was finally clearing the tension from my head. I looked out the kitchen window toward the side yard, and my heart stopped again. She was back. It was the exact same silhouette from the night before, only now she was fully visible in the morning light. She was wearing beige capri pants, a striped polo shirt that looked like it had been ironed with a ruler, and cheap rubber flip-flops. She was leaning over my flower bed, squinting through the glass, her nose about 2 inches from the screen. I did not hesitate this time. Threw the back door open and stepped out onto the grass. The morning dew was cold on my bare feet, but I was too annoyed to care. "Can I help you?" I said, keeping my voice as flat as possible. The woman did not jump. She slowly stood up, brushed a speck of dirt off her capri pants, and adjusted her visor. She held her clipboard in front of her like a shield of absolute authority. "I am Karen," she said. Her voice had this sharp nasal edge to it, like a violin string pulled too tight. "I am the president of the homeowner association of this community." "Great," I said, crossing my arms. "Did you need to examine my toaster from the window?" "You have several fines here," she replied, ignoring my question entirely. She flipped a page on her clipboard with a crisp, loud snap. "Your lawn length is currently over 3 inches, which violates Section 4 of the community guidelines. Your trash cans were left out on the curb past 6 in the evening yesterday. And you have visible cardboard boxes in your garage, which constitutes a visual nuisance." I blinked at her, my mouth slightly open. "I moved in yesterday afternoon," I said. "Literally yesterday. The moving truck left at 5. "Yes, I saw," Karen said, her mouth twisting into a thin, sour line that suggested she deeply regretted not being able to take my money immediately. "Which is why these are conditional. You have a grace period of 48 hours for adaptation, but this is just for now. You need to be very careful." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. The coffee was calling my name from inside, and I did not want to start a war on day 2. "Right," I said, nodding slowly. "By the way, was that you looking into my living room window at 11 last night?" Karen's face twitched, just for a fraction of a second, before she straightened her shoulders and looked at me with pure, unadulterated condescension. "The president's duties include maintaining the security of the district," she said. "By looking into my windows while I am eating dinner?" "In any way necessary," she snapped. With that, she turned on her heel and marched down my driveway, her flip-flops making a wet, slapping sound against the asphalt. If you are already shaking your head because you have had to deal with a neighborhood dictator who thinks a clipboard makes them a police officer, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. Leave a comment about your worst homeowner association experience, because let me tell you, this woman was just getting started. I watched her walk away, telling myself that maybe it was just a one-time thing. Maybe she was just establishing dominance, like a weird suburban dog. I went back inside, drank my coffee, and tried to focus on my remote work. But a week passed, and the feeling of being watched never really went away. I started noticing small things. Footprint in the mulch under my study window. The gate to my backyard being slightly unlatched when I knew I had locked it. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, I was sitting at my desk typing out an email when I heard a soft scratching sound. I looked up. There she was. Karen was standing on her tiptoes, her face pressed against the glass of my study window, her eyes darting around my room as she took notes on her clipboard. That was the breaking point. I pushed my chair back so hard it hit the wall, ran down the hallway, and flung the front door open. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice echoing off the neighboring garages. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" Karen did not even stop walking. She just waved her hand dismissively over her shoulder as she headed toward the sidewalk. "Just a security check," she called out, her voice dripping with boredom. "That is illegal, Karen," I shouted, taking a few steps toward her. "This is private property. I have the right to privacy in my own home. I understand there are association rules, but I'm warning you, if you do this again, I am calling the police. There is a law against peeping Toms, even if they wear visors. Karen stopped. She turned around slowly, and for the first time, she did not look bored. She looked furious. She marched back up my driveway, stopping so close to me that I could smell the stale mint gum on her breath. Her eyes were wide, and she had these deep, angry lines etched around her mouth. "Listen to me, you little wretch," she whispered, her voice shaking with a quiet, venomous rage. "I am a respected person in this community. I know the mayor. I know the chief of police. I know people who can make your life here very, very difficult. If you try to call the police on me, or film me, or make any kind of scene, I will ensure that your evidence is thrown out. I will sue you for slander. I will fine you for every single blade of grass that is out of place. And I will make sure your life in this town is an absolute hell. Your grandchildren will be paying me compensation by the time I am done with you. Do I make myself clear?" I stared at her. I could see the absolute conviction in her eyes. This was not a woman who was bluffing. This was a woman who had spent years terrorizing this neighborhood, and she had the connections to back it up. "Absolutely," I said, keeping my voice quiet. "Good," she said, patting her clipboard. "Keep your lawn mowed." She turned and walked away, leaving me standing on my porch in the hot afternoon sun, feeling completely defeated. Later that day, I tried to talk to my neighbor, Arthur. He was an older gentleman, a retired guy who spent most of his time watering his roses with meticulous care. I walked over to the fence and cleared my throat. "Hey, Arthur," I said. "Can I ask you something about Karen?" Arthur's hand shook, and he dropped his hose, sending a spray of water all over his leather shoes. He looked around nervously, his eyes darting to Karen's house down the street, before he looked back at me with a face pale as paper. "I have to go inside," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. "I left the stove on." "Arthur, it is 3 in the afternoon," I said. "The stove is on," he repeated, scrambling toward his back door without looking back. It was the same with everyone else. Every time I tried to bring up the association or the security checks to any of the neighbors, they suddenly had urgent appointments, or remembered they had to walk their dogs, or just plain walked away from me. Karen had them completely terrified. She had created a little fiefdom in the middle of the suburbs, and she was the absolute ruler. I sat on my sofa that evening, staring at the ceiling. I felt trapped. I had put all my savings into this house, and now I was being stalked by a middle-aged woman with a clipboard who had the local authorities in her pocket. It was a systemic problem, and you cannot solve a systemic problem with standard methods. You have to think outside the box. When it comes to thinking outside the box, I only know one person crazy enough to help. I called my old college friend, Derek. Derek is what you would call a mad scientist, if the scientist was funded by a diet of cheap beer and instant noodles. He works part-time at a chemical laboratory, but his real passion is building things that should not exist. He once built a fully functioning flamethrower out of an old leaf blower and a propane tank just to clear the snow from his driveway. I called him and explained the situation. I told him about the windows, the clipboard, the threats, and the neighbors who were too scared to speak. "Oh, this is beautiful," Derek said, his voice crackling over the receiver. "This is the perfect testing ground for my new mixture." "Your new mixture?" I asked, suddenly feeling a cold sweat break out on my forehead. "Derek, what are we talking about here? I want to stop my neighbor, not start a chemical war." "Don't worry about it," Derek said, laughing. "Give me your address. I will be there in an hour." True to his word, 50 minutes later, A heavily dented, primer gray minivan pulled into my driveway. The engine sounded like a lawnmower choking on gravel. Derek got out, wearing grease-stained cargo shorts and a t-shirt that said, "Stand back, science is happening." He slid open the side door of the van, revealing several large, unmarked white plastic buckets and 3 big jugs of clear liquid. "Help me carry these into the garage," Derek said, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. I looked down the street. I could see Arthur peeking out from behind his blinds, and I knew Karen was probably watching from somewhere too. "Derek, what is this?" I whispered, grabbing one of the buckets. It was surprisingly heavy. "The FBI is not going to show up at my door, right? I need to solve a harassment issue, not get featured on the evening news." "Relax," Derek said, carrying 2 of the jugs with ease. "Everything here is completely legal. Well, mostly legal. It is a bit of a gray area, but when you are dealing with a tyrant, you have to operate in the shadows." We got everything into the garage and shut the door. The air inside was warm, smelling of motor oil and sawdust. Derek set the jugs down on my workbench and looked at me with a mischievous grin. "You have a rat problem, Kyle," he said, "and I have brought the ultimate rat trap." "Okay," I said, leaning against the freezer. "Explain." "This," Derek said, tapping the white bucket, "is a synthetic polymer adhesive. It is essentially a super-strengthened version of the sticky substance they use in those little cardboard mousetraps. Only this is designed for, let us say, larger pests." "But people are not rats, Derek," I said, my heart doing a little flutter. "Technically, yes," he replied, shrug. "Physically, we have different skin biology, which is why I had to modify the formula. It is completely organic, made from fruit starches and synthetic rubber. It is non-toxic, odorless, and completely harmless to human skin. But once you step on it, you are not going anywhere without the proper solvent." "Why did you even make this?" I asked, staring at the bucket with a mixture of awe and terror. Derek paused, his smile fading for a second. "Let us just say some things are better left unsaid. Do you want to solve your problem or not?" I looked out the small garage window toward my side yard. I pictured Karen's face pressed against my glass, her angry voice threatening my future grandchildren. "Let us do it," I said. "Excellent," Derek beamed. "Now, we have to work fast. My minivan is blocking the view from the road, so the neighbors cannot see what we are doing on the side walkway. We need to degrease the concrete first so the mixture adheres perfectly to the ground." "And how do we get her off the ground once she is caught?" I asked. "I do not want her living on my walkway forever." "I brought the deactivator," Derek said, pointing to a blue plastic spray bottle filled with a bright pink liquid. "This is a mild citrus-based solvent. You spray this on the adhesive and it breaks down the polymer chains in about 10 seconds. It turns the glue into water-soluble mush. You wash it off with a hose, and it is like nothing ever happened. Except your little dictator will have been caught red-handed." "That is the beauty of it," I said, realizing the genius of the plan. "If I just recorded her on my phone, she would have her friends in the city hall throw out the case, and then she would make my life hell. But if she is physically stuck to my property, glued to the ground, she cannot pretend she was just doing a security check. She will be a public spectacle." "Exactly," Derek said. We set up a camera in the birdhouse to record the whole thing. We get the footage, we get the physical evidence, and we call the police. Even her friends cannot sweep this under the rug when there are dozens of witnesses laughing at her. We spent the next hour and a half preparing the trap. We went out to the side walkway, the narrow concrete path that ran directly under my study and kitchen windows. Derek used a heavy-duty degreaser to clean the surface, making sure there was no dust or loose gravel. Once the concrete was dry, he opened the white bucket. The adhesive inside was thick and clear, looking almost like liquid glass. He used a paint roller with a long handle to apply a thin, even layer across a 6-foot stretch of the walkway right beneath the kitchen window. In the bright sunlight, the adhesive was completely invisible. It looked just like dry concrete. "How long does it take to set?" I asked, watching him work. "It is ready right now," Derek said, sealing the bucket. "It stays sticky for about 72 hours before it starts to harden." "Are you sure she will come today?" I asked, suddenly feeling a wave of nervousness. My hands were shaking a little as I helped him pack up the rollers. We were about to set the trap, and my heart was beating like a drum. If you want to see how this ridiculous plan turns out, do me a favor and hit that like button. It helps the channel out more than you know, and trust me, the payoff is worth every second. "Of course she will come," Derek said, tossing his tools into the back of his minivan. "Look at this van. It is an eyesore. It is parked right in your driveway, blocking the view. A woman who thrives on control cannot resist a mystery like this. She is probably losing her mind trying to figure out what we are doing. She will be here before sundown." We went back inside, closed the front door, and drew the curtains. We sat in the dark living room, watching the live feed from the small security camera we had hidden in the wooden birdhouse on the fence. 10 minutes passed, then 20. I was starting to think the plan was a bust. I was sitting on the edge of my seat, my palms sweating, wondering if I had just ruined my own walkway for nothing. Then the camera feed flickered. A figure emerged from the shadow of the neighbor's fence. It was Karen. She was moving slowly, her head darting from side to side, her visor pulled low. She was clutching her wooden clipboard to her chest like a weapon. She walked up to the side of my house, her cheap rubber flip-flops making a faint squeaking sound on the grass. "Look at her," Derek whispered, pointing at my phone screen. "She is like a rat sniffing out the cheese." She reached the first window, the study. She stood on her tiptoes, peering inside, trying to see past the heavy curtains. She didn't see anything, so she took a step forward, moving toward the kitchen window. She stepped onto the concrete walkway. Her left foot, wearing the pink rubber flip-flop, came down directly on the adhesive. On the camera, we saw her stop. She tried to lift her foot, but the flip-flop was firmly anchored to the concrete. She frowned, looking down at her foot in confusion. "What the hell?" we heard her mutter through the open kitchen window. She pulled harder. The sheer force of her pull caused her foot to slip right out of the rubber strap of the flip-flop. Her bare foot came down on the adhesive right next to it. Instantly, her bare skin was bonded to the polymer. She let out a sharp gasp, her body weight shifting forward by inertia. To keep from falling, she took a quick step with her right foot. Her right flip-flop stuck instantly. She pulled that foot out too, stepping barefoot onto the glue. Now, both of her feet were stuck, one barefoot, one still half in a ruined sandal. She began to lose her balance, her upper body tilting forward. She did what anyone would do. She reached out with both hands to break her fall. Both of her palms slapped down hard onto the treated concrete walkway. The clipboard flew out of her hand, skidding across the dry grass, landing near the fence. Karen was now on all fours, her hands and feet completely glued to the concrete, looking like a very angry, beige-clad frog. "Help!" she screamed. "Help!" Derek and I waited about 5 seconds, just to let the reality of the situation sink in. Then we walked out the back door and stood at the edge of the walkway. I was holding my phone, the camera app open. Derek was sipping a cold beer, looking down at her with a look of pure scientific satisfaction. "Smile," I said. I took a photo. The flash went off, illuminating her face, which was twisted into a mask of pure purple rage. "You!" she shrieked, her voice cracking as she tried to lift her head. "You little wretch! I will grind you to powder! This is your last day of freedom. Release me immediately, or I will call the police." "Actually, Karen," I said, adjusting the camera angle to get a better shot of her stuck hands, "I already called the police. They should be here in about 5 minutes. "What did you do?" she screamed, trying to wrench her left hand off the ground. A tiny thread of clear adhesive stretched between her palm and the concrete, but it did not break. It was like trying to pull your hand out of cooled hot glue. "Oh, and I also accidentally dropped this photo into the Whispering Pines neighborhood group chat," I said, along with the live stream link from the security camera. Karen froze. Her eyes went wide, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in her face. "I will destroy you," she whispered. But the menace was completely gone. She was shouting at the concrete because she could not lift her torso without her hands pulling painfully on her skin. "You know," Derek said, taking a slow sip of his beer, "she is not nearly as intimidating when she is stuck to the floor like a cheap bumper sticker." "She really isn't," I agreed. Just then, we heard the sound of sirens in the distance. They were getting closer. And then, the neighbors started appearing. It was like a dam had broken. Arthur was the first one, out of his back door, holding his watering can, his eyes wide as he saw Karen pinned to the concrete on all fours. A slow, beautiful smile spread across his face. "Is everything all right over here?" Arthur called out, his voice loud and clear. "Everything is fine, Arthur," I said. "Just doing some routine pest control." More neighbors began to gather at the fence. Mrs. Higgins from down the street was there, holding her phone up, recording the whole thing. A couple of teenage kids from the corner house were laughing openly, pointing at the pink flip-flops stuck to the ground. Karen was screaming at them, her voice hoarse and desperate. "Go inside," she yelled. "Is an illegal trap. I am the president of this association. I will have you all fined." But her power was gone. The spell of her intimidation had been broken by a few ounces of synthetic polymer. Nobody was listening to her. They were too busy taking pictures. A white and blue police cruiser pulled into my driveway, its lights casting red and blue reflections across the side of my house. 2 officers got out, their heavy belts clinking as they walked down the path. The older officer, a guy with a thick mustache and a tired expression, looked at Karen, then at me, then at the clipboard lying in the grass. "All right, what do we have here?" he asked. "Officer," I said, stepping forward, "this woman has been stalking my property for over a week. She has been looking into my windows at night, and today she did it again. I installed a security system, and as you can see, she was caught in the act of trespassing and peeking into my kitchen. She trapped me!" Karen screamed, her face flushed red. "He put chemical weapons on his walkway! Arrest him!" The younger officer walked over to the clipboard lying in the grass. He picked it up and began flipping through the pages. "Well, well," the officer said. "There are detailed notes here about every house on the block. Times people leave, times they come home, what they have in their garages. This is a lot more than association business." "It is harassment," Arthur shouted from the fence, his voice trembling with years of built-up frustration. "She has been doing this to all of us for years. She threatened to sue my daughter because she parked her car in my driveway overnight. She looked through my kitchen window last month," Mrs. Higgins added, her face red with anger. The older officer looked down at Karen. "Mom, "We are going to need you to come down to the station," he said. "But first, we need to get you off the ground." Derek stepped up, holding the blue spray bottle of pink liquid. "Step back, officers," he said with a dramatic flourish. "Science is at work." He sprayed the solvent around Karen's hands and feet. Within seconds, the thick adhesive began to dissolve, turning into a watery, citrus-scented slush. Karen scrambled to her feet, her hands covered in gray dust and wet leaves, her dignity completely shattered. She tried to brush herself off and make one final grand speech about her connections in the city hall, but the older officer just took her by the arm and guided her toward the patrol car. "Save it for the judge, lady," he said. "Trespassing, stalking, and we are going to have a very long talk about what is written on this clipboard." The crowd of neighbors actually cheered as the police car backed down the driveway. Arthur walked over to me, a look of profound relief on his face. He reached out and shook my hand. "Thank you, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea what we have been dealing with here." The next morning, I walked out onto my front porch to get the mail. My porch swing was covered in gifts. There was a plate of warm chocolate chip cookies from Mrs. Higgins, a box of expensive craft beer from the guy down the street, and a card from Arthur that had $50 in cash and a note that said, "For the lawnmower fuel." It turned out Karen's influential connections in the city hall were nothing more than a cousin who worked as a filing clerk in the records department. And as soon as the video of her stuck to my walkway went viral on the local community pages, he wanted absolutely nothing to do with her. The association board met 3 days later and voted unanimously to strip her of her presidency and her membership. She put her house up for sale a week later. She moved out in the middle of the night without saying goodbye to anyone. The neighborhood is quiet now. The whispering pines are actually quiet, just the way they were meant to be. I sat on my porch swing this morning, drinking my coffee, watching Arthur water his roses. He looked over at me and gave me a little wave. I took a sip of my coffee, feeling the warm sun on my face. Just the way it should be. Folks, if you want to know how to legally confuse your HOA board, or how to deploy the tactical muteness protocol against a Karen in the wild, I've released the Ultimate Suburban Survival Kit. It's 2 classified 30-page satirical field manuals guaranteed to make you laugh and keep you sane. Check the links below to get them on Gumroad or Patreon.